Hello everybody, it's Donna. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified each time I upload a new video. Today's video is part of the Alphabet Inspiration Card Challenge, and today's letter is the letter I. We're going to be using Wink of Stella to paint from our ink pads in kind of a watercolory type way. The stamp set I'm using is Celebrate Sunflowers as well as the coordinating dies. For today's technique, I need to use the Stamparatus as I'm going to be stamping my images multiple times. I have in my Stamparatus a piece of cardstock. That's just to give it a little bit more of a cushion because the image is so large, it's hard for me to get a good impression. I store some 5.5 by 4.25 paper already cut in the little pouches that the dies come in. It just makes it handy for me to just be able to grab one of those. So I'm going to put that into my Stamparatus, hold it down with a magnet right on the edge because I know that I'm going to need most of that space. And then I'm going to position my stamps. I'm using the 2 sunflowers and the 2 leaves for this card. Now my stamps are stained, but that's because I've used them a lot lately and I've used them for stays on, so it kind of made the stamps black, which does not affect how it's used. So I don't care. I know a lot of people get a little bent out of shape when their stamps are colored, but I don't really care. As long as they still work, I'm good. Because I'm using Wink of Stella in our dye inks, if I use Memento, it would smear, or any of our dye inks would smear as well. So I can use Stays On, but Stays On is very dark and it's a deep color, which is fine. But in this case, I wanted something more of a brown. So instead, I'm using Ranger's Archival Ink in Vintage Photo. We don't sell this ink, but it is a permanent ink, and you might have something else in your stash, or you can simply use Stays On because that would work as well. It's going to take me a couple of times to stamp this so that it's completely solid, but once it's done, I'm going to remove it from the Stamparatus, but I am not removing my stamps because I am going to have to come back to it. Now we're going to start our coloring. Now I am using Wink of Stella, but I do have other sparkle pens beside me just in case I run out of Wink of Stella, because I know all of my sparkle pens and my glitter pens are almost empty, but I'm hoping I'll have enough in my Wink of Stella to finish the project. Now I'm using Daffodil Delight. You're not going to see this, but off to the side I'm going to have a small stamp block that I just simply tapped into the Daffodil Delight to use it as a palette. I'm using the stamp block as a palette. You could also just squish the case so you can get it on the lid, but that usually doesn't work for me. I have a scrap piece of paper there just because I know I'm going to have to wipe off some of the color. Now I'm using my Wink of Stella to just dip it into the ink on my stamp block and just pick up a little bit. And then I'm starting at the base of the petal and working my way out because I wanted the deeper color at the base. And so when something's big enough, I know I'm going to naturally just run out of color at the tip, so it'll be lighter. If I find on smaller ones that I have too much ink on my Wink of Stella, I will just wipe it off on a scrap piece of paper. Now I'm not working side by side because I don't want them to bleed together, because I do want distinction between the petals. So I want every petal to look slightly different. Now I'm going to work around the sunflower in the same manner and just keep going back to the other ones. This is one of my favorite ways to color next to using the blends, but this is just a good alternative. If you don't have the Stampin Blends, this is a good alternative as long as you don't mind the glitter, which is really what I wanted in this project. Once the first layer is done, I wanted to deepen some of the shadows on my petals. So I'm just doing basically the same thing, but I'm just kind of flicking out the color from the center. I'm not an artist at all, so I'm not trying to make it look really artistic. I'm just using the lines that the original artist intended as the shadows and just kind of flicking color across them. As you can tell, it's quick and easy, and you don't have to have a great artistic skill to turn out something that's beautiful. Once that's done, I'm going to move on to the leaves. For the leaves, I'm using Old Olive, and I'm basically just going to do the same thing. Now, when I first start the leaf, the bigger leaf, it's a little bit off the screen because I am zoomed in a bit, and it's going to look really dark. Well, it's not really that dark in real life. That is the stamp block that I have the color on. So right there, you can see how dark that looks. It's really not that dark. Old Olive and Pear Pizzazz are two of my favorite colors for leaves, as long as it'll coordinate. And I think the Old Olive worked out nicely with the Daffodil Light. I also could have used a second color in here, but I thought I got enough of the shading that I wanted. Okay, once that's done, we're going to do the center of the flowers. Now this time I'm going to use a sponge dauber to get the color on. I found it just a tiny bit easier for me to not have blobs of color. So I'm just using sponge dauber, but I'm when I stamp it into the ink pad, I am kind of pouncing it off because I do not want any rings or blobs or anything. Once it's dark enough to my liking, I'm going to take my Wink of Stella and just go over it to smooth it all out and to have it so it has the same sparkle and shine that the rest of the flower does. You can see all that sparkle and shine there. It's just gorgeous. Now I'm putting it back into my Stamparatus, and I want to tidy up my lines. I want my lines that I had originally a little bit more vibrant. So all I'm doing is I'm going to take the archival ink that I used, the vintage photo, and just stamp it again. Which you missed part of that because I kind of dropped it and made a mess, but and it just is subtle, but it is there. Going to wipe off my stamps, and I am going to I waited a long period of time because I wanted everything completely dry so that the embossing powder that I'm going to use on top of this doesn't go everywhere. Now you are probably wondering why I didn't just emboss it to begin with, and I could have, and that would have saved, then I could have used any of our dye colors. I didn't have to use the vintage photo, but I just liked coloring it without the embossing on it. It was just a little easier and it got me a really smooth finish. So now I'm just, after it was all dried, completely 100% dried, I used my embossing buddy and Versamark. Now I'm going to put the Versamark on a couple of times actually because I can't really see how much is actually on there. So I'm going to do that a couple of times, and then I'm going to use just plain ordinary clear embossing powder. That really helps the definition on the petals. Now you don't need to do this. You could just left it the way it was and it was beautiful that way as well, but this just added another little, it just kind of stepped it up a little bit. Now I keep my embossing powder in this little container. It's easier for me so that, because I make a mess. I still made a mess even with this today. Once I have my image all covered in the powder, I'm just going to grab my heat tool, heat up a little bit, and then melt it. Sometimes melting it from the back kind of helps as well, and letting your heat tool warm up a little bit just to help prevent some of the warping. Okay, now once it's done, I need to cut these out. Now, sometimes this trick I'm going to show you works, sometimes it's not necessary, but this time I just felt it was. What I did first is I just cut them out of all the dies. I just cut the images out of cardstock, but I'm using the negative space. The trick to this is to make sure you use a color that's dark. So I'm using black so that I can see it on the white. If you just did white on white, you're not going to see it. That was just a little leaf that I had originally done that you can see where the line wasn't nearly even enough all the way around the white border. So what I do is I just take my negative piece and lay it on top, line it up perfectly, and then you can see where your white is very clearly, how much of a white border everywhere, because it's really distracting if you're, I mean, I know that it's probably still not perfect, but at least that way, by having that on there, you can get as close to being perfect as you can. Once I have it lined up, as perfect as I can get. I will use some removable tape. This is Scotch removable tape, just to stick it down. Now, this still would tear. I know it tears the black cardstock, but I didn't really care about that. So I make sure I place the tape where any damage isn't going to affect my final product. Then I'm going to take the die and just pop it in. You can feel it. You can feel it when it fits. It kind of almost snaps right into place. You just have to double check there in better light to make sure it was lined up. And there you can see what I mean. Once it pops in there, you know what's good. It's not moving. It's exactly where it's supposed to be. And then it's just using like another piece of tape. Take it over to my die cut machine. And there you go. Now, as it is not absolutely 100% perfect, but is close. On that one, it probably wasn't as critical to use this, but I found on other pieces that just my eyes are old and not great. So it just gives it an extra little help in lining up. And then I'm going to go run through the other ones and do exactly the same thing until I have them all ready. I'm going to put my dies back. There's also other dies that I did end up cutting out that don't coordinate with the stamp so much. You just cut them out of normal cardstock. I cut them out of Old Olive just so the color would coordinate. Now those little black pieces, my templates, I guess you could call them, I just slide them in with my stamp case just in case I need to use them for something else, and they're already there. So there are the extra pieces that I cut out of Old Olive. I'm not sure exactly how many I will need, so I just cut out a bunch of them because I wanted to build up the focal image. I am also using a piece of Old Olive ribbon. I also took a piece of white cardstock, slightly smaller than the card front, so it's 5 1/4 by 4, and I embossed it using this particular embossing folder, but you could probably use whatever you have. I'm also using a piece of Old Olive cardstock, 4 1/4 by 11, scored at 5 1/2, forming a top folding card. I'm just trying to place where I would like everything to go, because at this point I wasn't sure exactly what else I wanted on the front of my card. Once I've figured it out, I'm going to attach the Old Olive to the front, Old Olive ribbon to the front of the card, using just some glue dots because I just want to kind of use it as a placeholder. And then I'm going to attach that to the base of my card base using some Tombow. And then begin placing my flowers where I actually want them. For the big sunflower, I did end up using dimensionals for that one, just to give it a little bit more dimension. But I kept the dimensionals right in the center of the flower, just because I knew I was tucking other things underneath, and I wanted to make sure the dimensionals didn't get in the way of me doing that. After I finish placing all these, I will glue them down. And then I will take more dimensionals and put them along the edge of the big sunflower, just because I felt that it was kind of getting flattened a little bit. And it makes it more, I don't know, stable. Just using some stamp blocks to hold the leaves down while the glue was drying. Now, in hindsight, I wish I had done a second small flower, because I would have put it up on the right-hand corner as well, just to make it more even. But at this point, I just wasn't going back to do that. But I think having the two on either side would have been better. So here's finished card. I used some gems from the Gilded Gems package just to add a little bit of pop of color. I also used dies from a retired set. I think it was First Frost bundle, just so I can mat the sentiment. As the sentiment I used was the one that says congratulations on blah blah blah. That was for the outside. On the inside, I stamped Let's Celebrate You, and then I also stamped in Sahara Sand the smaller sunflower, but I did stamp it off once so it gave a lighter impression. So that's the card for today. I hope you enjoy, and we will catch you next time. Please subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified each time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.